the start end. So there's the start.
So he knows when to start us. Yeah, good call.
Yeah, because John the Geek's been trying to like automate, like, because it takes a lot of time, I think, on his end
Yeah.
to like edit everything, and so so this I think is supposed to like help his editing, where like he can just like match the timestamps to be like, this is when the session started and this is when it ended. And so yeah, but anyways, let's see. I don't know if Stone's gonna join us. He did say he was gonna join in, but like to give everybody a rundown, Robert just mentioned that he's just been really busy and that he just can't commit. He just can't commit to the book club right now, and because we're really close to getting done, he thinks he might not be able to join for the rest, which is fine. But I just didn't have time to go through and do chapter 21. Like I read it and I was ready, but like to put materials together, I just was not able to do that before.
Was he was going today? Is that right? Was that
I think so, or at least started. Like I think that's what it was. But anyways, I reached out to him earlier last week, and I was like, hey, would you be able to do this? And then he got back to me, I think like Saturday or something. And then I was like, I do not have time to get through the material and put stuff together. And then I tried looking at the old cohort, and the old cohort didn't have anything. And I was like, so I think what's just best is we finish our conversation of evaluation today, push back, translating our code, and then I could take it. It's not, I read through it. It's not too long.
But I read it too. It's not too long, but it is kind of ponderous a bit. I thought, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, we can certainly have a short day today, and yeah, that's fine. I mean, we're not like we've always been saying, we're not in any hurry. I mean, obviously, we want to finish, but it's like not at the cost of actually like getting through it in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So yeah, whatever you guys want to do, I'm cool. I mean, if we all have to do one more like week or whatever, it's fine. Well, maybe since I have more time, I'll just kind of like just do some refreshment of like, what were some things we covered last week, just real briefly. And then, yeah, we'll get into some of the final pieces of chapter 20. So of course, this whole chapter is on evaluation. And specifically, this, we talked last week about this whole kind of marriage of this idea of quasi-quotation plus closures plus data mass equals tidy eval, which is, sort of the goal here for us in terms of, it gives us a principled approach to do non-standard evaluation that makes it possible to use functions both interactively embedded with another function. So that's, by the way, it's funny, like this is the best definition of tidy eval I've ever seen. Like in 5 years of hearing about it, it was always like, what does that mean? But this actually is semi-understandable. So we talked about the idea of evaluating expressions, and with the added addition of specifying an environment, right? So in this case, we're not specifying an environment when we evaluate X here. We're just doing it in the global environment. But here, where we're creating an environment where X equals 1,000, so we're going to take that value from here, but we're going to take the Y value based on, I believe, lexical scoping, right? Lexical scoping tells us that we're going to look for Y, someplace else, which is in the global environment. So talked about this last week. So we can specify the environment, which might entail specifying, like we're having certain values for certain arguments or whatever. Yeah, so we went through this idea of, we talked about the local function, which is a base R function where we can do a series of steps and dispose of intermediate data automatically. I was thinking about this actually. It's a little bit like using like the pipes. You know what I mean? Like when you think about using the pipe together a bunch of statements, there's like intermediate output that just isn't kept, right? I mean, we just sort of So I was kind of thinking maybe in some ways that's somewhat similar. I don't know. So yeah, so we're doing a series of assignments and then a computation. So that's all. Only thing that we're saving at the end of this is the output, not these other things. These other things don't get saved. Another thing this chapter seems to like to do is kind of recreate, sort of popular base R functions. We talked about this idea of local. So here we're saying, provide me with an expression and I'll specify, we'll create a new environment. And then we will evaluate this expression in this new environment. So that's sort of basically the same thing as this local function up here. Yeah, we talked about this last week, I guess. This was a weird, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to remember how this worked. Okay, so, oh, right, this was the source reference attribute, right? So that was the problem with in base R. We have to get rid of this the source eval function here. So and then in fact what we see here is this is the definition. If I say get rid of this source eval attribute, we now actually see something different, right? So as we would expect. And then we talked about this whole idea of evaluating and expressing ideas, and how having more of one than the other can have impacts. We kind of finished up, I believe, last week talking about this idea of closures. So yeah, it's this is something that we need the Rlang package for, which I think we've all learned is a hugely important part of doing advanced R. I think maybe that's a key thing that we've all taken from this. So closures are these composite structures that allow us to kind of marry together sort of an expression and then like an environment in which to enclose that expression, really, or excuse me, an environment in which to like potentially evaluate that expression, right? So and remember the whole take home message from the chapter on why this is a good idea is that it just allows us to pass around one thing as opposed to more than one thing. Like that's a pretty good reason for for wanting to do closures. So that we talked about there's three ways, which in our experience probably from previous chapters really means just one way, which is the first way, and the other two I guess we could do, but really I don't know that we didn't really ever come to any kind of agreement about, or at least I didn't see any kind of reason why we would want to do two or three over one. So using enquo or enquos, we get the creation of expressions. And then we can also do things like specify environments as we do here. And anyway, I'm not going to go through all the three things just because it's well, it gets boring, but yeah. So anyway, I think it's boring to I don't know, like I mean, like I don't know, like what exactly is new closure doing for us that enquo isn't doing? I don't know. I'm like, it's getting boring to me. But but before I finish that, is any questions about that though?
Well, I think the one thing, like going back to the idea about the source ref, I think wasn't the whole thing because of that, was because that base R is not aware of metaprogramming. Is that the example that we were looking at? Like the reason is because like that's what I thought it was. If I remember reading it, that part was like, it's just because base R doesn't know metaprogramming. And so if you
I didn't really hear that in those terms. I mean, I'm not saying that you're not, I mean, you could be right. I don't know. I think what I took, and that's why I copied and pasted the bit from 6.2.1. Is this it's not so much the lack of knowledge or this inability to work with metadata. It seems like it's just that there's these other additional attributes in base R, I guess. And so,
Oh, no, it's the other way. So it's like, the note that I have written down is like base R doesn't know about quasi quotation. So
Oh, okay, right,
it just prints the expression. So
right.
that's the note I was looking for.
Oh, okay.
So it's that's why it was kind of funky that we think it wouldn't work, but it does. And the part is because, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, when it does a print like this, the S3 method for print just for functions just prints this source graph attribute, which like I said, base R doesn't know anything about the bang bang has any special meaning in the source, so it just leaves it as it was in the source.
Yeah,
that's what it was.
So he recommends, like you said, just either just null that out if it's going to bother you, or use new function instead, which is a good, fine thing. Yeah. It's one of those. Yeah, it's just one of those things he puts in there because it probably surprised him at some point. So now it won't surprise us. Well, it probably will because of my memory, but
yeah.
2 months from now, I'm going to be doing this. Go, why is it doing bang bang X? What's it wrong with this thing? It didn't work, but it did work.
Yeah. So for closures, trying to remember like what it. Oh yeah, we already went through this. Sorry. Yeah. So under the hood, yeah. If you remember, this was I took this from one of the first cohorts slides. I mean, basically it's from the book, but just some modifications. Yeah. So closures are both their own type of class, but they also are formulas. They're call objects. We talked about, they have attributes, environmental attributes. They can, we can get expressions from them. So that this is, I think, this part of the chapter is just to show how much we can like work with these objects, right? I mean, we can check what their class is. We can, extract the environment. We can extract the expression. I mean, so it's all just in this one thing, right? So, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and I like this too. Is this was from the book. So basically, to do eval tidy is basically a shortcut to evaluate. Specifying in the evaluation function. To take an expression and evaluate it basically in an environment. So it's pretty simple, or it seems simpler. Yeah. So okay. So we talked about, well, first of all, we're using that new closure version, which apparently is rarely needed in practice, but useful for learning. So apparently that's what we're doing. So we want to create a closure where we have this expression in this environment where we specify X and Y, and we want to evaluate them in this environment, right? Yeah, so and then the last thing we talked about, oh yeah, this was the thing I think last week, Colin, you were like a little bit, we were kind of going back and forth on this, right? So we've got two closures, Q2 and Q3, where we specify different values and different, for X and in separate environments, and then we put using bang bang, we basically using quasi quotation to we embed it in an expression, right? So I'm trying to think. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, so of course when we just do the one, we get this, but when we combine them in a nested fashion, right? So we've got two closures sort of nested together. We get obviously a different answer. And then I'll be honest, like this last one, I didn't spend a lot of time with it, and actually I forgot. Gosh, now knowing what I know now about Robert not being here, I probably would have spent more time, prepping this a little bit today. My bad. But I will tell you this: like I've been kind of like looking a lot on like YouTube and other things about data masks, and this seems to be like a really important concept. I don't know if people have run into this much, but so I guess there's that group that's doing the R-lang, like documentation, and I think it was that group or some other tidy eval group or something through the same, institute, the same group that we're in. They were, doing data masks, and so they were talking. I meant to watch the video and I never got to it, but so yeah, what is a data mask? It's a data frame where the evaluated code will look first for variable definitions, right? So I guess, it's a little bit like, it's kind of like thinking about like an environment, right? So, I mean, yeah, so it's basically allows you to mingle variables from an environment and a data frame in a single expression. You supply the data mask as a second argument in tidy eval. So, or eval, tidy, excuse me. So in this case, we're specifying Q1 as a closure. We then specify a data frame DF, and we're basically saying, okay, hey, use this Q1 and look in DF to do all this stuff. Right, or at least that seems to be at least part of one of the things that we're doing, right? So I don't know, I guess I don't know if anyone else had any like issues, but I guess to me it's just like a different way. Instead of specifying an environment, you're just providing like a data structure to give information that you would have done in an environment instead, I guess. Does that make sense to anybody? I don't know.
It's just the idea that if you're working with your data, whenever we're doing work, right? We got the data frame, that's the main data frame we're working with, or versions of it, and we want to like evaluate some expression in that context. Mostly it happens behind the scenes, though, when we're using the tidyverse, right? So when using mutate, it's using this data mask behind the scenes. So you just have to write, new column equals A plus B, and it just works, right?
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's the point.
That's the data mask in action right there.
Yeah. I guess that's right. So yeah, because we're not looking in the environment, we're just looking in the data frame.
But you're looking at the data frame first and then the environment.
Yes,
it basically attaches a data frame as if it was an inner environment, right? And then,
right.
Yeah.
So conceivably in this expression where I have Q1 and DF defined, I could just define X as 100 in the data frame, right? And
if X was 100 for every row there.
Yeah. I mean, instead of it would do the same thing. I mean, it's almost kind of like needlessly complex to specify X in the environment and then also have a data mask or whatever.
The point was simply to demonstrate the features, not to give out.
Sure. Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. I don't.
That's the problem with these things. You're like, well, I don't know what we use that for. And to my mind, I mean, I keep saying this, but I'm like, I know in like a month, I'll be like, oh wait, wasn't there some way? But
what's that?
Like sometime like later, you're gonna be trying to do this. You're like, wait a minute, I kind of vaguely remember now why this does this, right?
Yeah, no, I know the feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I brought up the video. If I find it, I'll post it in the chat or something on Slack. Just because, I definitely. I don't know, it helps me to see like other contexts of discussing, this concept, because it seems like it comes up a lot, at least in a little kind of just looking at but as the this whole idea of pronouns, we talked, I think we kind of talked about, I think Ron mentioned this a little bit in his talk. It came up in quasi quotation, but because now that we're like allowing data masks along with environments where we're specifying potentially the same variable in multiple places, it's good to have a pronoun which in this case we're learning two pronouns, dot data and dot env. And I've actually done this in some like functional things. I didn't realize that we were doing this type of programming to alleviate the ambiguity or whatever, but so in the absence of specifying X as being in the data, I guess actually so we could do this conceivably, right? And this would make it 1.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, just as a way of kind of switching. I mean, it's not profound or anything, but so we have X sort of defined in 2 different spaces, and I don't know, like I'll be honest with you, as a data scientist, I kind of think it's best just not to have the same thing, the same variable named in multiple spaces. That's
I've never,
don't call it X in like, you know what I'm saying?
use descriptive names anyway, right? So when you use descriptive names, you should never run into this problem. But once in a while, you might run into it, even with descriptive names. It's nice to know there's a way around it, I guess, right?
It's true. It is true. Absolutely. I'm just doing that, that thing we do, which is, why is this important? But yeah, anyway. So yeah, so data and .env are obviously from Erlang, and that was it. So that's the end of the road for me. Like I said, it was only supposed to be like 20-30 minutes. But actually, since we're talking now, let's figure out. I mean, I don't know if let's see. Okay, so you're going to be doing chapter 21. Oh, well then.
Oh, I already made the change.
Well, then you shouldn't have to do 22. Is 22 like really long, or how?
I kind of want to do 22 because,
okay.
Well, unless somebody else really wants to do it, but I actually kind of want to do 22 because, I mean, that's just like really practical knowledge, and unless somebody really wants to take it.
I was gonna say, like, if 21 is really short, I could do it, but how long is it?
If you have interest in it, I'm not like, I mean, we can talk about it right now if y'all want to kind of talk about it, because I really have no interest. I have no interest in 21.
Yeah, I was gonna make the same comment, but I read through it, like I had a hard time reading through it because like, this is just not engaging me. I don't really care about this kind of I mean, actually, I know it's kind of I know can be important, but these are just like two examples of how to do it, one for SQL and one for LaTeX. And okay, but it's kind of clunky, and he demonstrates two different ways you can do it. But
okay,
if I ever have to do that, I'm gonna have to look at it again anyway. I don't know. It's me.
Okay, well then yeah, let's
I mean, we could just chat about it right now, and then
let's knock it out, man.
Yeah, like, because I really have no interest in in doing.
I realize you guys are all on the same page on that, because they're like.
Well, no, I was gonna say, so if we knock this out, then yeah, we're just down to 3 or 4 more chapters.
Yeah, debugging next, which is what I'm looking forward to that chapter in your presentation on it. So that'd be good.
Yeah, that would be fine. I mean, I would be happy to discuss, this some more, and like just to discuss this now and knock it out. Because when I was reading it, I was like, I have no interest in like translating it in my own language. Like, I see the importance of it when it comes to like HTML and when it comes to like SQL. They're just conveniences. And I guess the HTML one's really important for like Shiny. Because if you do any like the Shiny UI stuff, all that UI code does is it just outputs HTML. That's all it does.
It was kind of cool to see how it works, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, now I see how it works. It's not magic. I mean, when I type this out, it's converting it to HTML code in a relatively straightforward way. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to write something like that anytime soon. And by the time I ever do, spending a lot of time on this right now is not the best use of my time.
Yeah.
And I think like part of it was like trying to figure out like what are like, how can I say it? It's like trying to figure out like the different cases that you're going to have to figure out to like transfer our syntax into that language. So like when it talks about the HTML, it was the idea of escaping, right? Yeah. So like, you have to kind of know the nuances of the syntax that you're trying to translate into, and then you have to actually write that into your code, and then you have to use all of the different things that we've done, whether that be like quasi quotation, metaprogramming, environments, and all that, and I think even partly some OOP stuff to get it to work. And so right. I thought that was kind of interesting when they were talking about that.
In the LaTeX one, probably, how do you guys pronounce that? I say LaTeX some days and LaTeX another day, but
I say LaTeX.
I say LaTeX too, yeah.
So in the LaTeX one, it was kind of cute how he did that. Like he just evaluates it, but he evaluates it in a special environment where all the symbols have now these new, either turned into the LaTeX little escape /pi or whatever, and all the functions are either the special functions like frac and all that, or the rest of them he just defines a closure, right? That function will get called, which will just turn into that, the Roman font, right? I thought that was kind of neat how he did that. I don't think when I read that section, when I started reading that section, okay, this could be the same thing as HTML, but just with LaTeX. But no, it's like a completely different approach, which I thought was kind of cool. And I know there's no way I would ever come up with that. But I would have done it the hardest way possible if I had to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that I get a little confused of is the use of dots in some of these examples, like just some of like all the different rules that you need to know regarding the dots. Like intuitively, I understand what dots does is you can pass any arguments into the other parts of your function. But then when it gets into the point of like, knowing what environment those values are defined, that's where it just gets really confusing to me. Like,
yeah,
same.
But I have no answer to that.
Yeah.
You
know what's funny about the whole like LaTeX and the HTML stuff is, I mean, this book, this book was probably written before like R Markdown really became like the standard, I would imagine. But that's really like what a lot of this stuff is about. Like, it's like, how do we present, data in these other presentational languages like HTML or LaTeX, whatever. But yeah.
Well, I mean, it goes back to that example, like I mentioned before, with Shiny. Like all of those Shiny UI functions, all they do is they just output HTML. They take your user input and then just output the HTML to render it within the browser. Is all they really do. And that's pulling it from here. I mean, it's kind of neat with the SQL stuff, like with very simple SQL stuff, and I'm sure there's probably some more advanced stuff because there's different flavors of SQL that you can do. Different dialects as Hadley puts it. So that would get into like, how do you generalize, I think is kind of the big problem solving part that I was trying to get at, is like, how do you generalize all those idiosyncrasies, how do you do that in your code? And that's like where the real like problem solving, I think, takes place.
Yeah, the guys who did that DB player, it's like, I'm sure that was hard work. Right?
What's that DB player? What?
DB player, that's basically DB player basically does this, right? So.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I mean, like at the foundation, like, I mean, when you're talking about SQL, it's just like, select from, where, the foundational stuff is good. But when you start getting into like, Oracle versus MySQL versus, the different flavors, that's where it gets a little challenging, I would think, to like generalize all these functions to translate the SQL from the dplyr stuff. But
yeah,
I don't really have much else to add to this chapter.
Yeah, I don't think it's, I'm glad we're going through this, because it's not that. I think it's good that you got to pick and choose your spots, man.
Yeah.
And debugging is like way more useful than HTML arguments and whatnot. I would imagine, at least I think so. I don't know. That's my guess. But we should get into 21.
Okay, sweet.
22 next week. Sorry.
Yeah, so don't want to shortchange anybody, but for this group, I think we've
and actually 22 is pretty manageable too. I mean, it's like not that long. I mean, these are shorter chapters at the end, at least. So
so if anybody at the end, or if anybody's watching this a little bit later, somebody's watching this later, I think we're just gonna skip on into 22 and then we'll go from there. So I took it, so I'll take it. Let's see, translating our code. So I'm just gonna take that out. Delete that. And then no, I just screwed up the.
Do we know if Stone is good for 23 still?
I can reach out to him and ask him and see if he's good. And then
otherwise, we can just divvy it up some other way. So
and then we have improving performance, and then we have rewriting our code and seeing. I think we have everything covered. So we only have about 4 more weeks left to go.
So, that's good.
We're getting there. So
and right after this is over, Ron's going to join like 3 other book clubs. So
goddamn, better not.
No, seriously. I
I do want to start this tidy finance one at some point, but
oh man, I mean, I want to do them all, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the problem.
I'm the one that brought this one up to, that filled out the request for the tidy finance, because that's actually something I think would be very practical, and useful. But
Yeah.
again, it's a time thing. There's also a torch one. Somebody else.
Courts isn't like legal stuff.
No, torch.
Oh,
Yeah.
torch. Oh.
Deep learning.
I thought there was like tort law, like
Well, I'm
an
sure
R.
there
That
is.
would be pretty awesome if like
That's how you estimate how much money you can get
How
out
do you-
of
how
it. The optimal extraction
yeah.
formula.
That's
But
funny.
yeah, there's a bunch of them. I'm going to try to stick to just 2 though at a time. That's my new goal. 2
Yeah.
at maximum.